I'm going to be discussing the question of cartography and ethnography, ethnographic mapping, with a considerable amount of overlap with Zainab Shelik's intervention. The period will be slightly different, and I'll be talking more about ethnographic mapping. And hopefully we have a slightly different perspective on this issue. This is a very interesting map from the 1880s called A Bird's Eye View of Palestine. It shows three-dimensional contours of the coastal part of Palestine seen from the west. And in it we have a very interesting overlap of a number of theoretical and conceptual approaches to mapping, which became very heated up as we move to the First World War. The question of three-dimensional photography had evolved through the invention of the stereoscope and allowing a great deal of pilgrims, strategists, colonial officers from the West to come to Palestine and visit it virtually through stereoscopic viewers, through new highly accurate atlases, but with definitely an Orientalist and colonial way of charting the contours of the Holy Land. And it is at this moment that we see the evolution of Ottoman mapping in contestation with, but also with synergy with the way in Western cartography has evolved from the Napoleonic period and most importantly later through the work of the Palestine Exploration Fund and the very significant survey of Western Palestine of its 26 sheets that we'll be discussing in a minute. Palestine and Syria and the Ottoman imagination. This is something which Zainab had enlightened us significantly about, especially through her work on the establishment of the Hijazi Railroad and the relationship between mapping and railroad construction. However, Palestine and the Ottoman imagination went through several drastic changes from the period of Katib Shalabi and Peri Raisi to the period of the First World War mapping. In the Encyclopedia of the Ottoman Empire, Bruce Masters asserts flatly that Palestine did not exist in the geographical imagination of the Ottomans. He further claims that Palestine as a geographic entity was kept alive in the Ottoman period by biblical scholars, imperial cartographers, and Jewish references to Eretz Yisrael, meaning that the cartography of Palestine, the Ottoman cartography of Palestine, echoed and benefited from the delineation of boundaries of the Holy Land, calling it Palestine, only as a product of colonial and biblical Jewish conception of Palestine. This claim is not borne by evidence. This is what I say. From the beginning of the 17th century, Ottoman cartographers writing in Turkish, Farsi, and Arabic used the designation Philistine in reference to the southern part of Bilad al-Sham. This was a practice which followed the Umayyad Abbasi designation of Jund Philistine, whose capital was Ramle, and Fatimi designation of Ard Philistine, both deriving their terminology from the Roman Byzantine divisions of Palestina Prima and Palestina Seconda, which goes back to the period of the Christian era, the early Christian era. Ottoman administrative divisions of Syria shifted boundaries, but they were collectively referred to in the geographic lexicon as Syria, and Palestine, Sham, and Philistine in the Ottoman lexicon. Until the special province of Qudus Sharif was created in 1876, which became synonymous with Philistine. Under Midhat Pasha, referred to by Zainab, a separate province of Jerusalem was created in 1878, making it one of very few autonomous regions in the Ottoman Empire, of the Ottoman Sultanate. The other one in the Middle East was the Mutasarrifiyya of Jabal Lubnan, the Mutasarriflik of Mount Lebanon, and it was directly responsible to Istanbul in administration. So it had a substantial degree of autonomy in running its administrative affairs, but also redrew the boundaries of these two regions in a way which culled it out of the province of Syria, Iyalat al-Sham, and the province of Beirut, which contained the northern part of Palestine. That is, the area from Nablus to Ras al-Naqura became part of the Iyal al-Sayda and the province of Beirut. Ottoman geography goes much earlier than that. Ottoman cartography has a rich tradition of surveying the world of early modernity, beginning with Peri Reis, our Reyes Peri, magnificent map of America from 1813, which contained accurate descriptions of the newly discovered Western Hemisphere based on Columbus' second voyage to the New World. And it is said that many of the cartographers accompanying the voyage of Columbus were Arab navigators from North Africa, and that this was an important link which allowed Peri Reis to construct his famous map of the New World. In the work of Admiral geographer Peri Reis, the cartography of the Eastern Mediterranean, which is derived from Kitab al-Bahriya, written between 1521 and 1525, the cities of Palestine and Syria were drawn for military strategic purposes. It's a highly stylized map, beautifully rendered, but as a way of seeking your way in the manner of the Google map, it will lead you astray. The area from Latakia to Gaza appear as the coastal region of Sham Sharif, or Holy Syria. Remember, in the Ottoman imagination, the whole coastal region of Syria was holy, not only the southern part of Palestine, with Beirut, Damascus, and Jerusalem prominently displayed. Now we move to the important work of Katib Shalabi, تحفة الكبار في أسفار البحار, which was done like 80 years after Peri Reis. So this is 17th century, not 16th century. In تحفة الكبار, Katib Shalabi, the Istanbuli cartographer and traveler, constructed a workable navigational atlas for the extents of the Ottoman Empire and the Mediterranean. His charts for the Eastern Mediterranean and the Arab provinces included rich ethnographic commentary on the customs and conditions of their societies. From early on, the Ottoman cartography was highly ethnographic. We find that these navigational designs included a lot of commentary on social conditions, ethnic makeup of the population, travel methods, inland as well as by sea. And in it we see specific references to Philistine as part of Iyalat al-Sham. If you look at the bottom of the map from the right, you see the term Quds Sharif, and underneath it says Ard Philistine. This is from Tuhfat al-Kibar Atlas. Shalabi describes Palestine as the noblest of the administrative divisions of Syria. He devotes much of his observations on the region, which he visited during his pilgrimage to Jerusalem and Mecca in the years 1633 to 1634, to a detailed description of the main urban centers, their population, and their rituals. The bulk of his observation in Palestine is given to Gaza, Jerusalem, and Hebron. In the latter, he notes that the people are divided into two hostile factions: the Yemenis, or the whites, Aklu, and the Qaisis, or the Reds, Kizilu. When they clash, the Reds shout, Ya Ilah al-Barr, and the whites shout, Ya al-Ma'ruf. I don't know where he got these, but he must have heard him during his visit to Hebron. Maybe his ear had a Turkish filter to the Hebronite Arabic. These parties have survived, according to Katib Shalabi, these parties have survived from the pre-Islamic times and retain the bigotry of ignorance of al-Jahiliyyah. This is his words. After Shalabi and Peri Raisi, we see a significant evolution in Ottoman mapping. And by the 18th century, we see a beginning of synergy between European cartography of the Holy Land and Ottoman administrative military uses of these maps to it. And that synergy actually, and conflict sometimes, begin to appear very clearly as we come closer to the First World War period, which is the maps shown by Zainab earlier. Ottoman provinces of Syria included shifting boundaries, but they included mainly Aleppo, Damascus, Deir ez-Zor, Beirut, and the Mutasarrifiyya of Jerusalem. Palestine was made up of the Sanjaks of Jerusalem and the southern Beirut districts of Haifa, Akka, and Nablus. That is, if you put Haifa, Akka, and Nablus, which were Qada districts, and add them to the Mutasarrifiyya of Al-Quds al-Sharif, you have the modern plan of Palestine. On the screen, we see the first modern Ottoman map, which is designated as Palestine, coming from 1808, was drawn and published in Istanbul by Mahmoud Raif Effendi, a cartographer and diplomat. Of course, Ard Palestine is referred to in earlier maps, including that of Katib Shalabi from the 17th century, but this is the first modern map which corresponds to the period of the Napoleonic invasion. Pierre Qattan, who lived between 1765 and 1825, was the chief cartographer of the Napoleonic expedition. He did this map, probably the first accurate topographical map of the Holy Land, in 1799, but was not published until 27 years later in Paris. This is the part which shows Akka and the Bay of Haifa in it. The more important map in the European colonial tradition, of course, is the survey of Western Palestine, about which I will speak in a minute. At the same time, we have the first modern Ottoman atlas showing this synergy with Pierre Qattan. Was published before Qattan in 1802. And this actually is evidence of a very rich Ottoman tradition which continues from the period of Peri Raisi and Katib Shalabi. Jadid Atlas, or Al-Atlas al-Jadid, was published in Istanbul in 1802, 1803, was a landmark of Ottoman modern cartography. Authored by Mahmoud Raif Effendi and published by the Istanbul College of Engineering, it heralded the new administrative reforms of Sultan Salim III which are known as Nizam Jadid, was in the reforms in the bureaucracy as well as in the military. These maps, by the way, I was able to copy from the Library of Congress. I was not able to access them from Ottoman sources. Soon after, the imperial rivalry between the French and the British gave rise to the expedition by Condor and Wilson in the 1860s of the survey of Western Palestine. And its chief product was the 26 sheets of extremely accurate bird's eye view capture of cartographic details from Palestine, from Ras al-Naqura to Rafah. This is a part of Ramallah and Beira in the Condor map of 1878. The survey of Western Palestine was conducted as an imperial cartographic and archaeological project by the British Royal Corps of Engineers as a prelude to the conquest of Palestine. It was led by Major Wilson and Lieutenant Condor. The survey resulted in the publication of a map of Palestine consisting of 26 sheets at a scale of 1 to 63,000, the most detailed and accurate map of Palestine published in the 19th century. The Egyptians were involved also, but the Khedive Geographic Society actually was an Ottoman society. Of course, Muhammad Ali had separated substantially, but not nominally, from the Ottoman Empire in 1842. This map was constructed by the Khedive Geographic Society in Cairo in 1880. Egyptian geography under Khedive regime, nominally Ottoman, recognized Syria and Palestine as the northern and southern parts of the Ottoman Bilad al-Sham. But there was a significant dispute over Sinai. Was it in Palestine, Syria, or Egypt? It's a very interesting dispute because the 1912 map of Mutasarrifiyat al-Quds shows Sinai to be the eastern part of the Ottoman Empire, and it separates Sinai. It's an essential part of Al-Quds al-Sharif Mutasarrif Lake, and the Suez Canal, which was established by then, separates Ottoman Asia from Ottoman Africa. This is a map of Al-Quds al-Sharif, 1907, which is focused on water networks. And this is a very interesting map from 1912, published in Istanbul, showing Palestine and Tih Sahrasi. Tih Sahrasi is Sahra al-Tih, which is where the Israelites were lost for 40 years. This is the first official Ottoman map which identifies Palestine as a country, equivalent to the Mutasarrif Lake of Qudus Sharif. Note that Palestine's western borders are the Suez Canal, which separates Ottoman Africa from Ottoman Asia. This, by the way, has been reprinted often under the Erdogan regime, showing basically, I want to say Ottoman, but actually Turkish claims to Palestine as an Ottoman patrimony. Maybe Zainab has something to say about this later. Now we come to the First World War and the beginning of the issuing of military manuals. Military manuals were extensively used in the First World War to guide the officers into the nature of enemy territory and its population. These manuals were issued by German, French, Russian, British, and Ottoman commanders to their officers. They involved cartographers, historians, and geographers. We have a very unique document, you saw part of it before, called Palestine Risalisi, or Risalat Palestine. It was printed in the Jerusalem Military Press in 1331, Mali, equivalent to 1915. It was issued by the 8th Army Corps in Turkish And we have a rich treatise in it on population contours, on population, geographic contours, logistics of the Palestine front, the major frontier land with Suez and British Egypt. During the First World War, the Ottomans and German aerial photography were used substantially in determining both the building of the railroad, but also in initial urban planning. For example, substantial part of the Jaffa Corniche was planned, and the city of Bir Sab'a, which was founded in 1905, began to use German aerial photography in planning its contours. This was supposed to be my lecture today, but as you can see, I shifted gears. One of the most interesting part in Risalat Palestine, whose author, I believe, was Rafiq al-Tamimi from Nablus, includes a significant amount of ethnographic mapping. That is the use of labeled icons to signify the different national and ethnic communities in the region. This was already a French tradition established from the 1880s, both for the Balkan region and for Anatolia. However, there's significant difference between the ethnographic mapping in the Ottoman map of Risalat Palestine and the French and later Italian and British ethnographic mapping. I will refer to this difference in a moment. كيف الوقت؟ ماشي. Within the contours of Risalat Palestine, published in 1915 in Jerusalem, we see a crucial development, which is the redrawing of the map of Palestine to include the northern part of the three districts of Haifa, Akka, and Sur. That is, Sur was the northern part of Palestine in this new Turkish cartography. The northern borders of Palestine in this military map is the Litani River, obviously redrawn for strategic reasons to correspond to British colonial conception of what Palestine was, which also resonated with biblical maps of the same region. Now, Zainab hinted at these maps being influenced by the colonial conception of Palestine. And the first map I showed you hinted that these were the origins of colonial mapping. However, my interpretation is different. I think the Ottomans redrew the maps as a defensive mechanism against the inclusion of the British of large chunks of southern Lebanon in what they saw as historic Palestine in order to preempt European intervention. This is my claim. Here we have the two parts, Qudus, Sharif, and Nablus. I'll show you Nablus in a minute. In a 1915 military map drawn by the 8th Army. This detailed and accurate map of the physical contours of Qudus Sharif was printed in Istanbul for use by the 4th Army, later used by the 8th Army. I made a mistake. It uses a mixture of Turkish, referring to Bahar Lut, and Arabic place names. Because of its high accuracy, it was used by the British and Australian armies in 1917-1918 Palestine campaign. And this is the Nablus part of it. This was used both by the 4th Army and the 8th Army Corps showing contours of 1 to 20,000. Again, this I was able to acquire from Cambridge University, which has these maps marked and printed in Ottoman Turkish, but marked by pencil markings by British, possibly Australian military officers using the same Turkish map. What conclusions emerged from these maps? From the 16th century to the First World War, Ottoman cartography was driven by both commercial and military strategic logistics. Ottoman cartographers paid special attention to Italy, France, and the Mediterranean region, and to the Syrian coast and Hijaz. With the onset of imperial rivalries over the East Ottoman area, cartography began to draw on and make use of Italian, Spanish, French, and British cartography. But it was not a one-way borrowing as we saw during the First World War. Ottoman cartography was mostly associated with the detailed ethnographies of the regions mapped. This was a tradition started with Haji Khalifa in the 16th century, and Haji Khalifa is another name for Peri Reisi, and Katib Shalabi in the 17th century. For Syria, Ottoman cartography, beginning with Katib Shalabi, always drew Philistine as the southern part of Bilad al-Sham. Ottoman Sham shifted boundaries and was made of 4 or 5 provinces: Beirut, Halab, Syria, Qudus Sharif, and Balqa, which is Transjordan. As we come close to the First World War, closer attention to Palestine as the southern flanks of the Ottoman Asia and the defensive borderland of the Suez Canal. That is, the Ottoman cartography became strategic cartography for military reasons. The Ottoman conception of the Arab province in the military manual of the 8th Army reveals a number of assumptions about how Istanbul saw the frontier lands. Although the categories of Arabs and Turks existed in the popular and state military lexicon, these were not the categories used to designate divisions of the population. Rather, these population maps show an overlaying categories of ethnic, linguistic, religious, and tribal social categories. This is fascinating work, and what I want to show you now is how these overlaying ethnic and religious categories were used. The main divisions in Ottoman ethnography of the Eastern Mediterranean is ethno-social. Here are the main groupings. Syrians, Suri, refers to the area of coastal Sham from Skandarun to Rafah. And interesting, Skandarun here is a Syrian territory, and I think maybe this will be very upsetting to the present government in Turkey. Turk was a term used to the Western Anatolian region, and it's contradistinguished with Turkmen, which is the region between Sivas all the way to the eastern part of Anatolia, including the Kurdish regions. So Turkmen is a tribal notion of population, contradistinguished with Turk, which is an urban civilized category. Arab and Druze, again, they are designated as the people extending from Mosul to Hijaz and Najd. All these were Arabs. The people of coastal Bilad al-Sham were Syrians. يعني العرب والسوريين مش نفس الناس في هذه الرؤية. The main divide in these categories are between sedentarized population responsive to development plans and substantially urbanized population, which are the Turks and the Syrians, and those who are tribal groups who need to be co-opted and disciplined, the Turkmen, Arabs, and Druze. These are the wild population of the Ottoman Sultanate. In between, we have pockets of minoritarian religious groups of Mitwallis, Jews, Maronites, Yazidis, etc. always susceptible for manipulation and sedition by external elements. The whole idea of sedition becomes very much imbued in the cartographic drawings of this region. The main logic of these categories is to provide political, administrative, and military commanders and officers with a social mapping of the Ottoman frontier provinces in order to determine disciplinary, co-opting, and developmental policy. In wartime, it was a crucial roadmap helping the officer corps, who were mostly serving a distance from their native communities, determine the friendly from the unfriendly population. Notable examples of the effective use of these manuals can be seen in Muhammad Bahjat and Rafiq Tamimi's work, Wilayat Beirut, probably the best work of Ottoman ethnography undertaken by the two CUP functionaries as an official social demographic manual for policymakers. It is quite illustrative that this work was published simultaneously in Arabic and Turkish in 1914 and 1915, just before the breaking of the Great War. And I'm going to end here because the rest takes us somewhere else. By speaking briefly about this very important work. My claim from textual analysis is that the authors of Wilayat Beirut, the second part of which is the study of the Nablus region, are the same authors of Risalat Palestine. I could see whole paragraphs taken from one word to the other. Risalat Palestine is an anonymous military manual. Wilayat Beirut is an ethnographic official government study, which is equivalent to the Salname, if you know what the Salname is. That is, it's an almanac of demographic, population distribution, and administrative details. Now, it's possible that the stealing occurred in the other way around. That is, the Beirut Wilayat took from Risalat Palestine. But since one was published after the other, I suspect that Risalat Palestine is derivative of Beirut Wilayat, and I suspect from the wording that the real author of this anonymous work is Rafiq Tamimi, who's a very important Palestinian Nabulsi intellectual who taught at Najah College in its early days and became later a nationalist leader of Quwa in Najadi in Yafa with Muhammad Nimr al-Hawari. So here we see again a lot of maps similar to the earlier military maps we saw. We see the Let me read this as a conclusion. Is that okay? I can't read it, it's too small. How do you make this bigger? You can read it. Huh? This is another lecture. Okay. The view from the Imperial Center was different. In her review of the Ottoman Revolutionary Press, Palmyra Brummett throws significant light on the ethnic stereotyping in the waning years of the Ottoman rule. Only the Greeks, Bulgarians, and Albanians were ethnically cast in political caricatures, mostly through dress. Arabs were cast negatively only when the circle around Abdul Hamid's corrupt advisors, the monkeys, were associated with the old reactionary order. Otherwise, the Arabs were often seen as the victims of Italian and British imperialism in Libya and Egypt. That is, the resistance to the Libyans were resisted by Arabs. The population of Bilad al-Sham were Syrians. They were more civilized and therefore were more part of the scheme of the Ottoman Sultanate. A distinction continued to be made between Syrians and Arabs, especially when Syrian soldiers had fought valiantly in the defense of Anatolia in the Janak, Qattan, Gallipoli campaigns. In examining satirical cartoons, Bramet notes, other than in the anti-imperialist form, the Arab is as it is hard to find in these Ottoman cartoons. He does not appear as a rabid separatist demanding an Arab nation from the new regime. He does not appear, as he will in a later era in the West, as a catch-all symbol of terrorism and trouble. Indeed, one can scan hundreds of Ottoman cartoons without finding a figure who can be irrevocably tagged as an Arab. For that matter, one can scan hundreds of cartoons without finding a figure tagged as a Turk, except where Turk stands as a synonym for Ottoman in general, and particularly for an Ottoman as distinct from European. But it was within a few years during the war in which this identification of the Ottoman with the Turk that started a process of differentiation and exclusions, which leading to the undermining of the legitimacy of the term Ottoman as an all-inclusive term, meaning that the term Arab became associated with Prince Faisal and the Arab rebellions against the Ottoman regime. So all these ethnic categories, which was clearly designated in these cartographies, had been rediscovered, reused, and acquired a completely different meaning. Thank you.